Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're going to be looking at the world of plant-based meat and seafood. And I have to say, I'm pretty excited about this one. You know, it's one of those things I see all over the grocery store now. I'm seeing commercials for it. Everybody's talking about plant-based meat and seafood. And I have to admit, I'm a little bit curious. How is it that they get these plant-based products to taste so much like the real thing? So I'm really excited to dive into this today and see what we can uncover. And of course, I've got an amazing expert here to help us guide us through this. I mean, you sent over some really incredible articles, even some research papers. I even saw some stuff in there that I've actually read before myself and highlighted and dog-eared the pages. So I'm excited to really dig in.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I thought this would be a great topic to dig into. I think it's really interesting to look at the market forces behind this. We're talking about a market that's already worth billions of dollars, and it's projected to explode in the next few years.
Yeah.
We see all these huge companies like Nestle and Kraft. They're all entering the market alongside, these smaller startups. And so it really does seem like it's more than just a fad at this point. This is something that's really changing the landscape of the food industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not just veggie burgers anymore, right? We're seeing everything. Plant-based shrimp, chicken nuggets, all kinds of stuff that, they say it looks and tastes just like the real deal. But, how do they do that? Like, how do you get a plant to taste like shrimp? It's a little mind-boggling to me.
It is pretty amazing. There's a lot of science that goes into creating these products.
Yeah.
And you can't just mash up some vegetables and expect them to have the same taste and texture as meat or seafood. So they've had to come up with some pretty innovative ways to recreate those complex flavors and textures.
Yeah, that's a good point. So how do they do that? Like, what are some of the methods that they're using to make this magic happen?
Well, one of the key technologies is something called extrusion.
Extrusion.
Yeah.
I've heard of that. What is that exactly?
So extrusion is basically a process where you take plant proteins and you push them through a tube under high heat and pressure.
Okay.
And what that does is it forces the proteins to align and form a fibrous structure.
So like almost like a Play-Doh machine or something,
Kind of.
but for protein.
Exactly. It's like taking a tangled ball of yarn and then stretching it out into these long threads.
So it's not just about shaping the protein, it's actually changing the structure of it on a molecular level.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. But I wonder, is there a downside to using all that heat and pressure? Does it affect the flavor at all or the nutritional content?
That's a really good question. And, the answer is it depends. Extrusion is a very versatile technology, and it allows manufacturers to create a wide range of textures. But sometimes that high heat can impact the flavor and the nutritional value.
Interesting. So it's like a trade-off.
Yeah, you could say that.
So what about this other technology I've been reading about, shear cell technology? Is that kind of like extrusion?
It's similar in that it's also used to align protein molecules. But instead of using heat and pressure, shear cell technology uses a rotating cylinder to create a shearing force.
Okay, so it's more of a gentle approach.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. So what are the advantages of using shear cell technology over extrusion?
Well, one of the main advantages is that it can produce larger, more intact pieces of meat. So it's often closer to the texture of real animal muscle.
So for things like steaks or chicken breasts or fish fillets,
Exactly.
that sense. There's also less potential for damage to the flavor and nutrients.
So why isn't everyone using shear cell technology then? Well, it's a newer technology.
Right.
And it requires a significant investment for large-scale production.
So extrusion is still the more common method.
For now, yeah.
So we've got these two main technologies for shaping and restructuring plant proteins. But what about the ingredients themselves? Like, it's not all just soy and wheat gluten anymore, right?
Not at all.
Huh.
The world of plant-based ingredients is constantly expanding. There are so many different options now.
Yeah, I was reading through some of this research and I saw things in there I've never even heard of, like lentils.
Lentils.
Yeah, what are those?
So lentils are a type of water lentil,
Okay.
and they're incredibly nutritious.
Really?
Yeah, they're packed with protein and essential amino acids.
So they're a good source of protein for these plant-based products.
Exactly.
It seems like there's a real focus on finding ingredients that are not only sustainable, but also really nutrient dense.
Absolutely. You see that with pulses as well.
Pulses.
Yeah, things like peas, lentils, chickpeas.
Right.
They're all becoming really popular ingredients.
Yeah.
Because they're high in protein and fiber.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a relatively neutral flavor, so they can be used in a variety of different products.
That makes sense. I was also surprised to see that they're using things like root vegetables and cereals and oilseed proteins like broccoli and carrots and pumpkin seeds and watermelon seeds. I mean, the list goes on and on.
It really does. There are so many different sources of plant-based protein out there.
Yeah, it seems like almost anything can be a source of protein these days.
And then there's seaweed and algae.
Seaweed and algae
Yeah,
for seafood.
exactly.
Interesting.
They're incredibly nutrient-rich, and they have a unique taste and texture that works really well for mimicking fish and shellfish.
So like companies like Good Catch Foods and New Wave Foods.
Exactly.
I've actually tried the Good Catch tuna, and it was really good.
Yeah, they're doing some amazing things with seaweed and algae.
So we've covered pulses, vegetables, seeds, seaweed. What else is out there? What other surprises are lurking in the plant-based pantry?
Well, there's hemp.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that.
It actually has a lot of potential for plant-based meat alternatives. It has a nutty flavor, a white color, and a smooth texture.
So it could be used to make things like burgers and sausages.
Exactly.
Interesting. And it's a sustainable crop too, right?
Very much so.
I also came across some information about mycoprotein.
Mycoprotein.
Yeah, it's derived from fungi.
Ah, yes, mycoprotein. That's a fascinating ingredient.
It is.
You know the company Quorn?
Yeah.
They've been using mycoprotein in their meat substitutes for years.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a great source of protein and fiber. And it has a naturally savory umami flavor that's very similar to meat.
That makes sense. So it seems like there are just so many different options when it comes to plant-based ingredients.
There really are.
It's amazing. But, you know, with all these choices, how do companies decide which ingredients to use?
That's a great question. And it really depends on the specific product they're trying to create. They have to consider the taste, the texture, the nutritional profile, and of course the cost.
Right. So it's a complex decision.
It is.
And it's one that's being made by some pretty innovative companies. Speaking of which, maybe we should take a closer look at some of the big players in the plant-based market.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. There's some really fascinating stories there.
Awesome. Let's do it. Okay, so where do we start?
Well, I think a good place to start would be with Beyond Meat.
Beyond Meat.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's heard of them.
They've really become a household name.
They have. Those burgers are amazing. I've heard they even use beet juice to make it look like real meat.
That's right.
Is that just for show, though? Or does it actually add to the flavor?
It actually does both.
Really?
Yeah, the beet juice gives it that reddish hue,
Right.
but it also adds a subtle sweetness.
Huh. I never would have guessed.
Uh,
It's pretty clever.
it is. So what about their main ingredient, pea protein? I've been seeing that a lot lately.
Pea protein is a great source of protein,
Yeah.
and it has a relatively neutral flavor, so it's a good base for a lot of different products. So that's why it's so popular.
Exactly.
So Beyond Meat uses it in their burgers. And what else?
Sausages, ground beef crumbles.
All kinds of stuff.
Yeah, pretty much anything you can think of.
It seems like every company is trying to make the perfect plant-based burger.
It's a competitive market.
It is. What about Impossible Foods? What are they doing differently?
Well, Impossible Foods is really focused on this ingredient called soy legammaglobin.
Soy legammaglobin.
Yeah, it's a heme-containing protein.
Yeah.
That's the molecule that gives meat its iron-like flavor.
Ah, okay. So they're basically trying to recreate that in a plant-based product.
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing. How do they even do that?
Well, they take the soy legammaglobin and they add it to their Impossible Burger.
And that gives it the same flavor as meat.
And the same bleed.
The bleed.
Yeah, you know how a real burger will bleed when you cook it?
Right.
The Impossible Burger does that too.
Wow. That's incredible. So if they can recreate heme, what else can they recreate?
Well, that's the big question. The possibilities are pretty much endless.
I mean, it makes you wonder what the future holds for plant-based food.
Yeah, who knows what they'll come up with next.
So we've talked about Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods. What about some of the bigger companies, like Nestle and Kraft?
Right. They're getting in on the action too.
Yeah, I remember reading about Nestle's Awesome Burger and Incredible Burger.
Those are both really popular.
What are they using in those?
Mainly soy and wheat-based proteins.
Okay.
And Kraft Foods has their BOCA brand.
Right.
They use soy protein too.
So it's not just the startups that are doing this.
Not anymore. The big companies are realizing that there's a huge demand for plant-based products.
And they want a piece of the pie.
Exactly.
It's interesting to see how the industry is changing.
It really is.
And it's all being driven by consumers. People want more plant-based options.
And the companies are listening.
That's a good thing.
It is.
So we've talked about the technology, we've talked about the ingredients, and we've talked about some of the companies, but what does it all mean? Like, what's the big picture here?
Well, I think the big picture is that plant-based meat and seafood are here to stay.
Yeah,
They're not just a fad.
I agree.
This is a real shift in the way we think about food,
It is.
and it's being driven by a lot of different factors.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, people are becoming more aware of the impact their food choices have on the environment.
That's true.
Animal agriculture is a major contributor to climate change,
It is.
and plant-based agriculture is much more sustainable.
So by choosing plant-based foods, we can help reduce our environmental impact.
Exactly.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
And it's one that's resonating with a lot of people. It seems like more and more people are going plant-based these days.
They are, and for good reason.
I think so too. But, I'm curious, what does the future hold for plant-based meat and seafood? What's next?
One thing's for sure, the innovation isn't stopping anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to think that just a few years ago, the idea of plant-based seafood that actually tasted like the real thing would have seemed like science fiction, but now it's a reality.
It is.
So what are some of the challenges that researchers are still working on?
I think one of the biggest challenges is replicating the unique textures of certain types of meat and seafood.
Like what?
Well, for example, getting the delicate flakiness of fish or the satisfying snap of a shrimp.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Those are still things that scientists are working on perfecting.
So what are some of the ways they're trying to do that?
They're exploring new ways to refine existing technologies like extrusion and shear cell technology. But they're also experimenting with completely new approaches.
Like what?
Well, there's a lot of buzz around 3D printing of plant-based meat.
3D printing. I mean, I've heard of 3D printing, but 3D printed steaks.
It sounds crazy, right?
It does.
But it's actually a really promising technology. It could allow for even greater control over texture and structure.
So you could potentially print out a steak that has the same marbling and tenderness as a real steak.
Exactly.
Wow. What about other advancements?
Another area that's really exciting is cellular agriculture.
Cellular agriculture. What is that?
So basically, it involves growing animal cells in a lab to create real meat,
Real meat.
but without the need for animal slaughter.
Wow. That's incredible. So it would be like real meat, but it wouldn't involve any animals.
Exactly.
That's a game changer.
It could be. It's still in its early stages, but it has huge potential.
Yeah, it sounds
It could revolutionize the way we produce meat.
I mean, it sounds like the future of plant-based food is going to be even more diverse and innovative than what we're seeing today.
I think that's a safe bet.
It's almost like we're witnessing a culinary renaissance,
I'd like that.
a rediscovery of the potential of plant-based ingredients.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are some of the key takeaways you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that plant-based meat and seafood are here to stay. They're not a fad. They're delicious. They're versatile. And they offer a range of benefits for our health, the environment, and animal welfare.
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen that today.
And the science behind these products is only getting better. So we can expect to see even more realistic and appealing alternatives in the future.
It's exciting to think about.
It is. And at the end of the day, this movement is about more than just what's on our plates. It's about creating a more sustainable and compassionate food system.
I completely agree. This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening for me, and I hope it has been for our listeners as well. Thanks for joining us, and we'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on plant-based meat and seafood? Have you tried any of the products we talked about? Share your experiences with us in the comments below. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and maybe even try a plant-based burger or two. You might be surprised at how much you enjoy it.